Good evening. You're watching Raw Politics from the European Parliament here in Brussels. Now, this week, from Brexit to MEP expenses and all the action at the UN General Assembly, we've got all the best bits and the highlights for you, in case you missed it. No matter who you choose to believe, reported rumours from inside the British Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservatives or suggestions from the opposition Labour Party, UK citizens may be heading back to the polls over Brexit. According to the Sunday Times, May could call a snap election as early as November. Now, this as the Labour Party prepares to vote tomorrow on whether to keep all options on the table regarding Brexit. And as the French president doubles down, here's your Brexit brief. France's Emmanuel Macron is turning up the pressure on Brexit negotiations by threatening to boycott the next big summit in November. Reports suggest he won't attend the meeting unless a withdrawal agreement is finalized in the next few weeks. Macron says that Theresa May must make further concessions to ensure that there's no hard border on the island of Ireland. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain's beleaguered Prime Minister has held a cabinet meeting in Downing Street to nail down post-Brexit immigration policy. This comes just days after EU leaders roundly rubbished May's Chequers plan. A majority of her top team now reportedly wants a Canada-style trade deal with the EU. And 300 kilometres north at Labour's annual conference in Liverpool, Jeremy Corbyn is facing pressure from party members to back a so-called people's vote on Brexit. Corbyn has been reluctant to support what many dismissed as a rerun of the 2016 vote, but he's backed down, giving members a chance to vote tomorrow on keeping all options on the table, including a new referendum. I mean, to put it bluntly, it's a bit of a mess right now over there. I mean, again, depending on who you listen to, Bruno, which of these options do you think is most likely?
I think people need to think about what happens if you reverse the referendum. Where will that leave British politics? The EU is politicised as never before. And I detect absolutely no appetite in Brussels, in the Justice Lipsius, in the Commission, for starting all over again. I think people have had enough.
And talking about that appetite, Marietje, what do you think from the Brussels point of view? How are they analysing, how are they looking at what's happening in the UK right now?
I think it's been very, very painful to watch for a long time, to see the big gap between political promises and reality. And I think we're coming closer to a sort of moment of truth where, as you can see, you cannot promise everything without taking the consequences. And I think Theresa May, in that sense, is running up against her own reality. And, you know, I think all of us here in Brussels, no matter which political party you're from, think this is a very sad moment for Europe and for the UK. And I really wish it would not have happened.
And speaking about consequences.
I think we just, first of all, need to look at all these options. Is a deal likely, still likely, the most likely option? Yes, it is. There is no groundswell, really, I think, the general public for a second referendum in the UK. And there certainly isn't amongst most of the political class, because they know how incredibly divisive it would be for Britain. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you've got a vote that then reverses the decision, is it then the best of three? You know, it gets... is a general election possible? It is, I think, only by default. If we get to a situation where it seems like there is the real, genuine possibility of no deal, because ultimately there is not a parliamentary majority in the UK for no deal.
And yeah, I think we go back to Bruno, Macron's reaction. Is it symbolic now of you know, what Europe is feeling, saying, well, Britain, you've got to get your house in order? So what does that mean? You wrote about this story.
I think it makes it tougher to get to that final summit, to get to that political declaration, which can be fudgy because it will be done by leaders, it will be a joint product anyway between Britain and the EU 27. If, as it seems after Salzburg, the whole of a withdrawal agreement, apart from maybe a few I's and crossing a few T's, has to be sorted out over the next 3 weeks, that seems to be quite a hurdle for Theresa May to negotiate, principally because of the difficulties surrounding the Irish backstop as an issue which touches on constitutional and territorial elements of Britain's integrity, which make it very, very difficult. Well, party political elements in the sense that there isn't a single political party that supports the Irish backstop as it's currently tabled.
Do you suspect
by
other
Michel
leaders
Barnier
will follow the example of Macron?
Well, what exactly was...
Well, I think they did. I mean, they did. That's what happened at Salzburg. So Macron made the intervention. The door was open. Theresa May had walked into the trap because she'd given the impression she'd essentially taken British politics to the table. It didn't play with them. And that is essentially what what is going on at the moment.
And Mary Jo.
Well, I don't think President Macron said anything that was new in terms of where the EU 27 stand. I mean, they've always highlighted the integrity of the internal market, the need to avoid a hard border with Northern Ireland. I mean, what do you hear that is new that he articulated?
But sometimes it's not about necessarily what you've said; it's when you say it. And I think, given his tone, it was pretty clear that was sending a message to Theresa May.
And Darren,
but I think she could have seen it coming for months, if not longer. So I'm surprised that this is now considered to be a breaking point, whereas I think the EU has been remarkably united and consistent on where they stand.
And Darren, you've been looking at what this means for Europe. I mean, what the impact will be of Brexit.
There's been an awful lot of focus, and there is a continual focus, of course, on what Brexit means for Britain, as there should be. But, if there was this scenario of a no-deal Brexit, it would clearly not be good for the rest of the European Union. It is something that European leaders recognise. And we got some stats, actually, of the cost of kind of crashing out, according to the IMF. I think 210 billion euros loss up until 2030. That's the hit to the European or the EU economy, potentially up to 1 million job losses and a drop across the board of 1.5% in GDP. Now, clearly, there are some countries that would be simply harder hit because of that, not least of all economies like Ireland. It shares a land border. It would almost be as badly hit as the UK. The Netherlands, Rotterdam, a massive port. Again, obviously geographically close by. Denmark and Belgium too. So it is quite difficult for the European Union because in the worst case scenario, which everyone recognises is the worst case scenario in terms of the political classes and the leaders, if not all politicians, that no deal is very, very, very damaging for the British economy, but also pretty damaging for the UK,
just to put it in context,
EU one as well.
The IMF also said that in the past quarter century, the economic and financial ties grew closer by 40%. I mean, that is incredibly substantial. 751 MEPs, hundreds of millions of euros in annual expenses. And according to a ruling today from the European Court of Justice, taxpayers, they're not entitled to know exactly how that money is spent. Now, the legal challenge was brought by journalists after Parliament denied access to documents about the money MEPs receive on top of their salaries. And that included general allowance, travel allowance, daily subsistence, and funds for staffing. Well, today in court, the court sided with the Parliament, refusing to provide access to documents. It says institutions must refuse access to a document where disclosure would undermine the protection of privacy and the integrity of the individual. So I'd like to go to you first, Ernest, as an MEP. Do you agree with this court ruling? Is it right or wrong?
I think it's completely wrong. We've been calling for transparency here in this House. I think a majority of MEPs, according to what we vote on these issues in plenary, are in favour of more transparency, and particularly on the general expenditures allowance, because this is 4,000 euros that come on top of our salary, and this is not an extra salary. This is money that needs to be used in a certain manner. There should be rules, and that is why from the Greens we have a policy that this money is kept in a separate bank account, that we keep receipts of how do we use that money.
If majority of MEPs want transparency, why is this the direction that the Parliament is taking?
Because so far the board of the Parliament has blocked any reform.
Do you know why?
And for transparency, that you should ask Mr. Tajani and his Vice President why that is the case. But I think for us it's very clear. It's very easy to put very simple rules as we have as Greens and the European Parliament. This money should be kept in a separate bank account. We need to keep receipts of everything that we spend, and there should be checks on these receipts. And of course, we're not asking the House to check on every single receipt, but you can do some controls on a certain percentage of the receipts randomly among different MEPs. This could be done very easily.
But you know what the question is going to be. What are you trying to hide? I mean, it's absurd that this is even in court, right? This is not about personal integrity or personal privacy. This is about public integrity. And if Europe wants to, for sure, get themselves more Donald Trumps elected, this is the way to go about it.
This is the
not
kind of
telling
behavior
voters how their money is used. It's a basic issue of trust between voters and government.
Absolutely. This is the kind of thing that fuels your skepticism, isn't it?
It fuels skepticism in general. Again, what are you hiding? Why is the leadership of the Parliament against this? MEPs could certainly disclose receipts. They could say we went for coffee with a constituent without saying who was drinking the coffee.
Yeah.
There's nothing that's being dealt with here that is a national security issue. That stuff is handled in the capitals. Right. So again, the question goes back to President Tajani and to the EPP, the dominant party in the parliament. What are you hiding?
This question. Now, this case at the ECJ was originally brought by journalists. And Darren, you managed to speak to one of the journalists today who brought on the case. Right?
And when you look at some of the Tessa, just the figures involved in what you guys get and what you claim. I mean, you know, there's obviously the monthly salary of what, €8,611. Then there's an office salary of before tax, 24,164. That's for office staff. Then there's the daily subsistence when it comes to expenses, €307 per day. And then on top of that 4,000, which is not accountable at all. I mean, that's to most Europeans. That is way and beyond what they get. And to not have to properly explain what you're spending the money on, I think, is what people are outraged at. Now, the explanation, of course, from the Parliament is this about privacy and it's about work overload. But given you're weighing up those factors about transparency and balance and scrutiny in a democracy, that's probably quite important. But as you say, I did speak to one of those journalists, Anushka Delic. She is based in Ljubljana. And this is what she had to say. And I asked her, first of all, about how she thought today's ruling had gone.
I think it's disappointing, to say the least, or to be diplomatic. It's disappointing. And it's also worrisome. I think it comes at the worst possible time, given the state of the European Union today. I think that it really feeds into the hands of EU sentiments or EU skeptics, because it is in effect saying that the members of the European Parliament are not to be scrutinized by the public because it's their private data. And if we say that this data is private, then that goes against all principles of public spending that any other EU institution or any other EU official has to adhere to, or, you know, a democratic institution in any European member state.
I was just going to, is this the end of the battle, or do you carry on your mission?
Of course it's not. I'm half Croatian. I have the Balkan spirit in me, and I will definitely not stop. And the group will surely appeal the decision.
So she raised there the point that you, David, also raised. I mean, but is the European Parliament really any worse than other governments around the world?
Well, let's just consider how crazy this is. If I take an MEP out to lunch or coffee in Brussels, I'm subject to more accountability and disclosure than the MEP is. I mean, this is very
different.
Even though it's public money.
Right.
Right. I've got to tell Politico who I'm having coffee with and what they're paying for. This is the kind of thing that there is. I mean, you do have some parallels. In the United States Congress, which I've covered, Congress is not actually subject to the freedom of information laws that cover the White House and all the executive agencies. It's another example of this remarkable behavior by legislatures, by parliaments who use their ability to make laws to shield themselves from basic public disclosure. So it's not singular, it's not unique, but it is absolutely ridiculous.
And there is a warning here, of course, from what happened in Britain and the UK Parliament 10 years ago. A massive scandal. MPs were spending money on duck houses and moats and on second mortgages. And you know, that has really undermined people's trust in politicians, so much so that you could argue it was one of the factors that led to the vote on Brexit. The people simply did not trust what politicians had to say anymore. And that is a warning shot for the European Union.
I think it's a matter of transparency and of democracy. It's taxpayers' money. People have the right to know how it is spent. But also, with that transparency, we would avoid probably certain misuse of funds if they happen. When everybody is on the public scrutiny, then you would think twice before misusing your money. So that's why I think it should be absolutely obligatory for all MEPs that all this information is public, as we are calling
and
for.
you were saying that majority of MEPs
we voted for that.
But actually, not all MEPs support. Not all of them support this, because some MEPs support the move to allow the public, don't support rather, to allow the public access to their expenses. And some Germans in the EPP group are particularly against the full transparency of their allowances and expenses, because they've previously blocked measures that would mean, better accounting of expenses. So we invited several German EPP members to join us today, but they did decline. They did, however, they sent us this statement. They said today's judgment protects the citizens. Whoever approaches MEPs must be certain that the issue he or she raises is treated confidentially without MEPs being held accountable, who they paid the two coffees for. MEPs are not obliged to disclose their travel expenses, where they go, by what means, and to meet to whom. So this is a question of privacy, and it was raised by the European Court of Justice as well. But is there a point to be made here about privacy?
No, well, they don't even want to disclose their own names when doing that statement. So I think this is rather unbelievable. Well, if they want to defend that this should be kept secret, I mean, they should argue with that openly, saying who they are. I mean, for me, it's not a matter of privacy, because we're talking about taxpayers' money. For me, it's very clear.
And I'd venture a guess some of these same German MEPs were strongly in support of accountability and disclosure by Greece when Greece was receiving EU money in order to survive its debt crisis. So come on, this is a really...
I think there is an argument to be made about, of course, there will be an increased workload, even if it is just random checks. There will be that. But you have to balance things up. Clearly, this court cases cost money. But you have to balance it up by the fact that it is incredibly important for taxpayers who work incredibly hard, who mostly earn a lot less money than MEPs, that they are at least able to find out what their MEPs are spending their money on.
I think one of the other arguments is that, doing so, putting so much attention into declaring all these expenses would take away from the time that MEPs would have to do their jobs.
But again, they've had time to fight this court case.
I mean, sorry, I kept all my receipts and I have my numbers in my website. Sure. It's not a lot of work. And we have assistants here to help us with that. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
President Trump, he's being hailed a hero on Twitter today, and it's all over how he referred to a Kurdish journalist during a news conference. Alex Morgan in Lyon in the Cube has this story. Alex.
Tessa, it was a fairly extraordinary news conference, wasn't it? It went on for a long time, and there was an unsuspecting journalist in the audience who became an internet sensation afterwards following this exchange. I'll just show you the video we posted on our Twitter feed.
Please, Mr. Kurd. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. President. Two quickly questions. What will be the USA relations with the Kurds?
Oh, I thought I just answered that.
Post-ISIS. And
okay, we're trying to get along great with the Kurds. We're trying to help them a lot. Don't forget,
so just to stop that there, it was that initial interaction, Donald Trump talking up the relationship after that, but saying Mr. Kurd to the journalist. Now, people initially thought that's a bit insensitive, but it's had the opposite effect. We spoke to Rahim Rashidi, the journalist referred to as Mr. Kurd, this morning on our programme, Good Morning Europe. But he's also tweeted to say, no, I'm proud and I'm thanking the president. He said the same to us. He is thanking Donald Trump for saying Mr. Kurd. And there's other journalists like Zinar here saying, we're all proud Kurds. The fact the president is recognising our ethnicity is brilliant. He's saying now in all future press conferences, we will introduce ourselves as Mr. Kurd as our intro. So, Tessa, an unexpected twist to that conference.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team in Lyon. EU Justice Chief Vera Jourova used a speech in Vienna today to talk about European nationalism. Well, she said racial abuse and discrimination are on the rise, and she blamed, in part, the media and hinted at what she called smart regulation of the media. And I spoke to Vera Jourova a short time ago and asked her why she blames the media.
No, I didn't blame media for anything. I called on the bigger responsibility for all of us, of the politicians, of the media, of the opinion leaders, because we see that the atmosphere in the society is worsening, and we have to address this.
Yeah, so how do you intend to address it? What is your solution? You were talking about regulation. What does that mean?
Well, I spoke about the regulation in very general terms because I spoke about the regulation which we have in the European Union. I spoke about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. I spoke about the legislation which is...
But when it comes to the media?
Well, I didn't speak about any concrete regulation. I spoke about the need of more responsibility. I mentioned the audiovisual directive, which is already in force, and I spoke about the support of high-quality media. So I think it's a misinterpretation of what I said. I didn't speak about regulation of media. I spoke vice versa about the need to respect the freedom of expression.
Okay, but you were saying that because you know newspapers like The Sun, for example, which you brought up, if it's freedom of expression, why did you have to comment on what they were putting out, for example?
No, I spoke about the cases when there are comments targeted on concrete people, which might incite following, attacking, and I think that to call somebody dirty rats, it's to my taste, it's going too far. But again, I am not speaking about regulation. It's the responsibility of every media, and we have to be more careful about the consequences, all of us, including the politicians.
Yeah, don't you think people are smart enough to decide for themselves? Do you think that they are easily misled, or they believe everything they read, that there needs to be guidance from yourself or other politicians?
No, not at all. I am the last one who would like to give guidance to people what to think. I am here to protect the freedom of expression and freedom as such. So this is my steady position, and my speech today was full of it.
All right. So, okay, once and for all, to answer the question, who is responsible, in your opinion, for the rise of nationalism and divisive rhetoric?
I think this is shared competence of us, politicians, of the opinion leaders from all different spheres, of course also of the media, of the silent majority, because when the people see that somebody is under attack, maybe they should also raise voice. There are a lot of opportunities in social media to cultivate the space. But this is nothing which should be ordered by regulation, and I have to emphasize it once again. I didn't mean it like that.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Jourova. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, with me in the studio to talk about the media's role in rising populism, we have our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, still with us, Politico's chief Brussels correspondent, David Hirschenhorn, and socialist MEP Kathleen Van Brent. All right, I'll put it to you guys, what Ms. Jourova was saying, media responsibility. How much weight do you put on the media?
Do you want me to put a figure on that?
No, responsibility.
No. Absolutely. I think if you look, and there Mrs. Jourova is absolutely right, within the European Union we are facing a huge threat by extremism, extreme right, populism, that will attack, and that has the intention to attack democracy in European Union as such. So that is, of course, a threat, and in that it's the responsibility of politicians, of media, but also NGOs and others to defend democracy. Where I do not agree with Mrs. Jourova, I don't know what her intentions were, was to sort of try to regulate the media. What we need in Europe is a big diversity on media and a lot of different opinions and a lot of diversity. If you look to the problems in Hungary, the problem there is that the media is attacked by politicians, and it's.
Yeah, but where do you draw the line?
Is it the responsibility of the media to defend democracy?
No,
of course it is.
No, it's our responsibility to defend the truth, because we can't defend a particular type of democracy or not.
No,
Viktor Orban believes he's running a democracy. It's not our place to defend that type of illiberal democracy any more than it is our place to defend the liberal democracy that Emmanuel Macron believes he stands for in France. Our job is to defend the truth. Now, here, Vera Jourova was saying something. Well, actually, she was afraid to come out and say it. What she wanted to say was that most of the UK press, in her mind and in the mind of many people in Brussels, was a carrier of Brexiteer propaganda, lies that led to the Leave campaign, partly contributed to the Leave campaign winning that referendum. So there is some anger and bitterness there to what she and others in Brussels believe were falsehoods carried by the UK press. That's what she was bashing back against. She doesn't want to come out and say that because that's a much more controversial thing, especially now when Brexit is a fight.
Okay, can I come back to that, because that's interesting. in a democracy, the media has a crucial role to play. And
yes.
In that sense, it is absolutely crucial. That was my key point, that you have big diversity. You have different media, you have newspapers, and that there is no concentration or only one sort of media.
Yeah.
And there's a rising problem in Hungary, for instance,
but also,
in Turkey, but also in the UK, where there are big concerns of media, that there is a monopoly, a growing monopoly, and you can agree or disagree with Mr. Murdoch and his empire, but Mr. Murdoch was in favor of the Brexit, and he had a huge impact on the media in the UK, so you cannot deny that.
Right, but the problem was not being in support of Brexit. The problem was lying in support of Brexit. This is why I say our job is to defend the truth, because there's just not one type of democracy.
But also, no, all sorts of democracies. But I think
I want to bring up. We were talking about the UK media. So before we get into that debate, I want to bring up the Sun cover that Ms. Jourova was referring to in her speech. It was, I think they say, rats. Can we bring up that graphic?
You
there
dirty
you go.
Rats.
You dirty rats. There you go. So that is the...
and also called them 2-bit mobsters.
So do you think this is too much? This is too much? This has gone too far? And
it's actually the headline on an opinion column, as I understand.
Okay.
And as an opinion, they can have whatever opinion they'd like. It is rather dramatic.
Should
one
that
might say
regulated?
Overly dramatic to say that they're 2-bit mobsters or dirty rats for restating an EU position in Brexit that hasn't changed for a year and a half. But no, we know that there's no regulation needed for the press in that case.
Sure.
The Sun's got to make its decision about how responsible or irresponsible to be on its
and that
front
front page was followed a day later by, I think, Theresa May sticking 2 fingers up on the cliffs of Dover at the rest of Europe. Now, is that in search of what David says, the search for truth? No, it's clearly not. Is it provocative? Yes, it is. Is it there fundamentally to sell newspapers and to make money? Yes, it is. But because we live in a free democracy world, it doesn't have to defend democracy, but because we live in it, the Sun is also perfectly entitled, as long as it doesn't break any laws, is perfectly entitled to print what it wants. And the big question this comes down to is, has the media got some form of responsibility about trying not to promote extremism? Yes, I think we can all accept it does.
Sure.
However, we also have to accept, and politicians have that responsibility as well, but we also have to say that people are not idiots. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, we trust people to make a decision, and then say, well, also, we've got a responsibility to make sure they're not misled in a certain direction.
Okay, taking out incitement to hatred and all the extremism, but there are opinions that maybe some people don't agree with that make it to the media. Is it a reflection of society, or do you think that that is pushing an agenda that you don't like, or
No. Let me be very clear on that. It's absolutely a part of democracy and a freedom of speech to be a Brexiteer and to use all sorts of arguments. But something else is the wording you use and the respect. I think there is a line to draw, but it's up to the newspapers to draw that line. The line that we drew as politicians is, for instance, we have anti-discrimination and anti-racist laws. The moment you table racistic speech, then you are offending the law. So there's the line.
I will tell you, if the EU wants to improve the quality of journalism by mandating higher pay for journalists, we're prepared to get behind it. Other than that, let's keep the regulation out of the
But let's also agree that if there is no democracy, there's no freedom of press. And in that sense, I do still think that the press should defend democracy.
Emmanuel Macron, indeed, another high-profile EU leader who was taking center stage this week. He gave a fiery speech at the UN General Assembly. Take a look.
N'oubliez jamais que les génocides qui ont fait que vous êtes là aujourd'hui, ils étaient nourris par les discours auxquels nous nous habituons, parce qu'ils ont été nourris par les succès d'estrade que nous applaudissons, parce que nous sommes en train aujourd'hui de voir se déliter ce droit international, toutes les formes de coopération, comme si de rien n'était, par peur, par complicité, parce que ça fait bien. Non! Moi, je ne m'y résous pas, parce que je viens d'un pays qui a porté ces déclarations qui nous font là, parce que je viens d'un pays qui se tient debout, qui a fait beaucoup d'erreurs, beaucoup de mauvaises choses, mais qui a su tenir à chaque moment de son histoire et de l'histoire internationale une forme d'universel. C'est aujourd'hui, c'est maintenant. Alors ne vous habituez pas, n'acceptons pas.
Well, that was very dramatic. I mean, James, do you think that he sees this as a stage where he can shine? Because maybe back home he can't.
I'm just getting so tired of this shtick from Macron. I mean, it's like, how can you consistently be so passionate about everything? It just isn't credible. It's an act. I don't believe him anymore. It's
Is it because it's the only place where he can actually shine now in the international stage abroad?
Right, he can stand there and no one will challenge him. You know, it gives him an opportunity to say his bit, but I've seen him do it the same thing in the European Parliament, after every summit. You know, everything is so emotional and so important. And I think it's stretching the limits of credibility.
I think there is a certain thing that when, and we've seen this with other leaders, when there are difficulties at home, when there are domestic problems, the world stage, in some ways, as James points out, is not just a safe space because it tends to be less challenging, but it also builds into the ego. And whenever we think about Emmanuel Macron, and all politicians potentially have got egos. I didn't want to go that far.
But also, just to point out that he was making a point-by-point rebuttal of Donald Trump's speech. Is he branding himself as sort of the anti-Trump from Europe?
Well, the style was typical Macron, but the content was good. I liked what President Macron had to say in New York, making very clear that we in Europe are in favour of multilateralism, that we are in favour of a fair global order, and that we are against any kind of nationalism and isolationism. So a good speech, and I think this was a good European response to one of the...
Do you think anyone's listening to that message of multilateralism?
Well, where's the place to address something like this than at the United Nations General Assembly?
James has got a point that you can't always operate on fifth gear, but Europe needs people like Emmanuel Macron because, you know, no offence to Donald Tusk or to Jean-Claude Juncker, who are also speaking this week. I mean, they're not going to rile crowds. They're not going to get people listening. Emmanuel Macron has clearly got the ability to do it, and Europe could probably do with a couple more of him.
Let's move on to another story we're watching, because on Sunday, Macedonians will vote in a referendum on whether to add North to their country's name. But this is about much more than just rebranding. At its heart, it's about national identity and cultural heritage. The name change could end a 27-year dispute with neighboring Greece, finally making membership of the EU and NATO possible for the Balkan nation. Prime Minister Zoran Zaev and his Greek counterpart Alexis Tsipras have been striving for thorn relations, but a yes vote is not the last hurdle. All right, well, one of those hurdles might just be election interference. We have Alex and the Cube team in Lyon who have been looking into this part of the story. Alex, what have you found?
Well, Tessa, a big part of this story is the online campaign against participation in the referendum. We've been digging into this in the Cube. Needless to say, it's a very complicated issue. We will be digging into it more as the referendum approaches. Let's just show you this. This is a website we have identified using a hashtag that has been used tens of thousands of times, shared tens of thousands of times. It is this hashtag here. It means boycott. And just look at the visuals here. That is the ballot box, and here, boycott, right across the front of it. Now, why? Why boycott? Well, obviously, as you were saying there, the aim of the referendum is to try and reach some resolution on whether the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia becomes the Republic of North Macedonia. But that referendum needs 50% turnout to be legitimate. A boycott campaign is encouraging people not to take part. Why? Just look at the mission statement on this particular website, one of those at the forefront here. It's to prevent the generational sin and preserve for future generations. Basically, they're calling it a mass citizen rebellion against the legitimization of historical treason through an illegal power grab and referendum fraud. Now, this website, again, we have done a search on it. We do not know who is behind it, but we do know the domain name is based in Greece. That is all the information we've been able to glean at this stage. Let's just take you through some of the mission statements. They've got a long campaign here. They're saying their activities are aiming people to stop people from going and taking part in this referendum. But look at some of the imagery. Here, Pepe the Frog. That is a straight-up symbol of the alt-right. And many people sharing, using this hashtag in their accounts, whether those accounts are authentic or behaving like bots in authentic accounts. Either way, many are identifying as right-wing, proud nationalists, seeing this as an international campaign, or presenting it as such, against the people, the Macedonian people, and calling, therefore, for a boycott of the referendum. Let me just leave you with this. It's not just on that website. Here's an example of an English language tweet showing you the kind of imagery people are using with hashtags both in English and in other languages as well. You can see here, Tessa, regardless who's behind it, there is a concerted online campaign encouraging people to boycott this referendum.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Well, clearly people are getting active, involved in this upcoming referendum. Eva, why is this referendum so important and what's at stake?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm Macedonian from Greece. So you understand national identity is a real issue that is not being resolved. So I would agree that the solution should be erga omnes. And this is a very strong case that I saw now it's being discussed in this country. Of course, we really need a solution. And we have in NATO, we have with Turkey a lot of tension. We need stronger allies and we have to have an erga omnes solution. So I would say that there are some things left to be agreed. And of course, the referendum would be valid if it's 50% of the presence of the voters, and still it's non-binding, so it has to go through the parliament. So we still have enough steps ahead to make sure that we have a solid solution that will not hide all these decades what the government of Fyrom was, decades of irredentism.
If the name change doesn't go through, what is the impact?
Well, first of all, it has to pass through the parliament and both parliaments,
sure.
Actually, also the Greek parliament. And as I said, it's still reversible as long as the constitution has not been changed. So they have to change constitution. Irredentism is there, yeah. And we have to have good faith among allies to be able to work together and include them in a coalition, an alliance like NATO and the European Union.
And I think, Andrew, that's the crux of it, right? That you were mentioning the EU-NATO accession being a part of it. Fyrom wants to be a part of it. That is at the heart of the matter here, is it?
Yeah, I mean, just to place this in context, I mean, what's at stake in this vote on Sunday? I mean, people might wonder, Macedonia is a small Balkan country, but what is at stake here is a country that has been isolated and consigned on the EU's southeastern flank for close to 3 decades. And if it can pass this referendum, the hope is that it can open the doors to EU and NATO membership, which is important not only for that country and for the young people there who are looking for opportunities despite bleak economic conditions and a very polarised politics. There's also a lot at stake for the EU as well to be able to show that it can be a force for stability in the region. I think the Greek government should be commended for actually working on this negotiated compromise, because there are nationalist forces in both countries who don't want this to succeed. And there are also forces outside of these countries. I mean, we saw on the Cube there, we don't know who is behind this website. We don't know where it's being funded from. But what we do know is that the Greek and Macedonian government have reported that foreign intelligence agents are trying to sow dissent in both countries and sow opposition to this deal. So it's actually very, very important.
And Andrei, briefly, I mean, Russia is watching this very closely, isn't it?
There's been a remarkable increase of Russian diplomatic activity in the whole region, especially with Bosnia and Herzegovina and contacts with the Serbian leader Dodik. And as we know, there were allegations of Russian plot in Montenegro. So all this region, Russia is desperate to keep it. But it's probably feels that it's lost its Slavic brothers. But now
is there talk in Russia about interference? I mean, we were saying we don't know where this comes from. Is there talk in Russia? You're hearing anything about that?
They talk in the West. They accuse Russia of interfering in the same way it did in Brexit campaign, in American elections. But I would split NATO and the EU issue, because we noticed that there's real serious resistance to these countries' NATO aspirations. But as for EU, it's less so, because Russians are probably realizing that it's better to have its allies inside the EU, like Hungary and some other pro-Russian forces, but NATO is a taboo. NATO is a no-go, because Russia feels it's threatened more and more, that it's encircled by the NATO countries, and they wouldn't let this happen.
A referendum on name change actually has geopolitical implications. All right, we'll leave it at that for now. We're watching that on Sunday, that referendum. have you ever seen two people shaking hands? I mean, we'll see a lot of shaking hands at the United Nations. Tonight. Now, you sometimes when you see them doing that, you have the urge to get into the action. It seems you're not the only one. Let's look at today's raw moment from the UN General Assembly where Jean-Claude Juncker met Antonio Guterres and Moussa Faki.
Thank you.
I mean, these lighten up the mood, don't they?
Theater.
Do you think it's theater?
The thing is, we've all been there, though. We've all shaken someone's hand rather awkwardly. I always think it's quite difficult, though, when there's obviously lots of cameras around and there's more than one person. But, I mean, I've got a little bit of sympathy. We've all misjudged those situations.
I mean, there's so many awkward moments, right? I mean, because of, we have a lot, when we talk about this behind the scenes, we have a lot of examples. Now, let's look at some of our favorite awkward handshakes over recent years. Take a look. I will ask all of you, what's your favorite one, Bruno?
I like the Macron-Trump because Trump's ambushed people. Macron watched YouTube, boned up on it and just got him. And there was something just very good entertainment about it. I feel a bit sorry for him, though, because I remember Jose Manuel Barroso, who used to be president of the Commission, he used to say, imagine my job, I have to shake hands with people who I really don't like. And I think this is the problem.
Which we don't often have to do that
ourselves. It's like a power play also.
It's also always the pat on the back. It's always that is a proper power play.
Okay. That was the week that was here in Brussels. Join us again on Monday. We'll be live from Strasbourg at the European Parliament. See you then on Raw Politics.